Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our lectures in the philosophy of science, economics, but more specifically dealing with the issues that pertain to economics, ladies and gentlemen. As you're aware, we've had a series of lectures. We actually started with the nature of understanding. That was lecture 1, and we went on discussing a number of philosophical issues up to lecture 22. So today's lecture is lecture 23, but just to remind you that in our lecture 21 we did discuss and conclude the issue of truth, which is one of the fundamental problem in economics and the philosophy of economics. And then in lecture 22 we looked at the philosophical tale of two research cultures, if you recall, which was the qualitative and the quantitative. And just to remind you a few things that we covered in that lecture, we looked at the two research traditions, qualitative and quantitative, but more so focusing on the philosophical aspects. So we covered issues of axiology, and axiology in that perspective was divided into what we call idealistic axiology, and within idealistic axiology we covered idealistic ethics. Aesthetics, not ethics, but aesthetics. And then from there we continued and discussed and related these concepts of ontology, epistemology, theoretical perspectives, methodology, methods, and sources to issues that relate to reality out there. And of course, at the end of the day, we are able to relate those aspects to the two research cultures, that is the qualitative and versus the quantitative, if you recall very well. Now that was lecture 22, and in lecture 21 we discussed that fundamental problem that we call truth. And the truth is one of the major issues that we have to really discuss at one stage or the other, because it is really very important, and we need to really understand what truth is all about. And that element of truth comes from the definition of knowledge, where knowledge is defined as justified true beliefs, if you recall that. And right from lecture 1 up to lecture 22, we've been really discussing issues that relate to JTB, the justified true beliefs. Now in lecture 23, and this is our concluding lecture in the series, in our lecture series of philosophy of science in economics. Lecture 23, I want to really introduce a critique of that definition of knowledge, which is the justified true belief. And therefore, in this lecture, I will be looking at what we call knowledge and the Gettier problem, And this really, Gettier knowledge and the Gettier problem will constitute lecture 23. And the number of books that I really want you to go and read, for instance, but before you go to the books, there are also papers and journal publications. For instance, Gettier himself in 1963 wrote a paper, and that paper is justified true belief knowledge. And certainly that's a paper that you should look for, and is available on the internet, and you'll be able to read it. You can also read another paper, which is a logic of justification and truth-making. You can also, and that is by Giordani, 2013. You can also read another paper on by Girle, 2009, and it's about modal logics and philosophy. But that is actually a book. It's a book Modal Logics and Philosophy, second edition. And you can also read another book, which is published by Kirkham, 1984. Does the Gettier problem rest on a mistake? And you'll find that quite interesting. And then if you also go to the Journal of Philosophy, there's a paper published in 1967 by Goldman, and that paper is about a causal theory of knowing, and is published in the Journal of Philosophy, ladies and gentlemen. The books are too many, and you will get a whole list later on. But just to give you the structure of our lecture today, I'll really not go into the details of the Gettier problem, which challenges our traditional understanding of knowledge, the justified true belief. But I will talk about three issues in this lecture. I will introduce the concept as developed by Gettier in 1963, and I will go ahead and certainly introduce the cases which seem to be the building blocks and the bedrock for his argument. And those are the aspects that we are going to cover in this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you are ready to listen to the ideas that were put forward by Gettier. Now, I'll tell you that within epistemology, in 1963, of course, we find arguments which were advanced by Gettier. And within this field of epistemology, 1963 was the most striking year of Gettier, and of course also to the discipline of philosophy. And this gentleman called Edmund Gettier challenged and changed the traditional thinking of knowledge, and more so epistemology. And from that time up to today, people are still grappling with that particular concept. So it was the year that Gettier published a single paper and potentially of much epistemological consequences, and actually of much epistemological moment. And that was the year of that paper. This is usually referred to as the year of that paper because it changed our traditional thinking of knowledge as defined by the traditional philosophers. So Gettier's paper asked how we should define knowledge. It was a central question. Can we rethink? Are there specific changes or additions that must be made to the definition? And as you can see, according to Gettier, right, when he challenged the definition of knowledge, and that was really the kind of knowledge called knowledge that, I'm using and you should put that into quotes, right, knowledge that, and of course, which had earlier on been defined as propositional knowledge by philosophers. So Gettier asked that fundamental question as to whether we should continue defining knowledge using the traditional understanding of knowledge, which we call knowledge that, or the traditional understanding, which is actually a propositional knowledge in this case. Now, his paper caused epistemologists speedily to accept that knowledge could not, after all, be defined quite as they had presumed or claimed it should be defined. And as you can see, unworriedly, they had been talking of knowledge along these lines. Any instance of knowledge is a belief, but not just any belief is knowledge. And a belief being a belief is not enough to make it knowledge. And those were really the traditional benchmarks along which knowledge was being defined. And therefore, Gettier challenges, and he says, what is also needed, right, in this definition is for us to rethink and come up with new ways and understanding of this problem. Of course, not only the problem, but the way we define knowledge in this perspective. So, this account was sometimes formulated more succinctly as a conceptually reductive definition which came to question by Gettier. So the definition was to be conceptually reductive in virtue of its definitions using only concepts other than that of propositional knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for us, in order to understand this concept very well, we know that traditionally knowledge was defined in terms of propositional knowledge, right? And P certainly represents propositions, and the traditional equation that you're aware of, right, where you say that to know that P is, right, and that is a propositional knowledge, is by definition to have a well-supported or justified true belief that P, and that is the proposition. So that is all there is to knowing, according to the traditional understanding. So knowledge is justified true beliefs. So you've got true beliefs, yes, so the beliefs must be true, and that is what we discussed in lecture 21, and lecture 20 and 19, if you recall. So we wrestled with that concept of truth because we wanted to understand that definition of knowledge, right? So along that kind of understanding, the element of belief also came to the fore, which we discussed in our lecture 19 and lecture 20 as well, right? We did question those particular aspects, if you recall, under that topic of truth, which we discussed. So truth is an element, and is at the heart of the definition of knowledge. Beliefs are also at the center of the definition of knowledge, and the justification is at the center of definition of knowledge. And therefore, for you to be able to claim that you have knowledge, then you must have justified true beliefs. However, this came to kind of questioning by Gettier in 1963 when he published his paper. So in 1963, epistemologists at the time believed, right, and still believe, that Gettier revealed the falsity of that otherwise highly tempting conception of knowledge. So philosophers at that time came to believe that really Gettier had done a very nice job in terms of challenging the traditional understanding of knowledge. So his brief paper posed a question: is justified true belief knowledge? Right. So whereas the definition was that knowledge is justified true belief, his question was, is justified true belief knowledge? Now, before answering seemingly incontrovertibly with no, so at the end of the day he was able to prove that actually that was not probably not the right thing to put forward in this case. So by this he meant, of course Gettier meant, that justified true belief is not all that there is to the definition of knowledge. So epistemologists then and since concurred with him, and of course now, I know some people talk about the post-Gettier epistemology, but you can't talk about the post-Gettier because we are still wrestling with the ideas that Gettier propounded. And of course, the term post-Gettier epistemology could be misleading. We do now live in a post-Gettier epistemological time. Yet not all the current epistemology engages either directly or indirectly with the details or even the spirit of the Gettier's paper. And of course, whereas that is the situation, you will discover that we need a reflection. We need to reflect on these ideas and the arguments that were raised by Gettier. And that's why I'll be presenting to you very soon the cases which seem to bring these arguments to the fore. So as you can see, accordingly, the role of the Gettier-aware epistemology when working in this conceptual neighborhood is standardly taken to at least presuppose that result uncertainty, not to question it or to inquire seriously into whether it is correct. So David Lewis put that same point more forcefully in 1983, and you'll find that in the writings, Philosophical Theories, right? And he says that philosophical theories are never refuted conclusively. Now, Lewis spoke for many, almost all, I should say, epistemologists when attributing to Gettier that major achievement in 1963 of trying to challenge the traditional definition of knowledge. And indeed, that was a genuine achievement and nothing less than the incontestable overthrow of what had been a long-standing and epistemologically central thesis or presumption about knowledge. And of course, as you can see here, the word has long since spread beyond epistemology, and the philosophers in general are called Gettier, Edmund Gettier, that major achievement. So he did a tremendous job. For example, in 2009, especially the publication made by Ben Bradley introducing his book on well-being and death, he says that if a philosopher is asked to point out examples of truth that philosophers have conclusively established, then the first would probably be that justified true belief is insufficient for knowledge. So this is one of the major achievements of our time. So if somebody asks you of what you have achieved over time, you can actually challenge this by saying, well, Gettier or Gettier's presentation and achievement is one of its sort during this period. And again, when you look at the works of Handlord Johann Glock when trying to ascertain what analytic philosophy is, he contemplates the widespread waning of the ambition to find analytic definitions of concepts. And indeed, he reminds us of the most spectacular case following the Gettier's classic definition, ladies and gentlemen. And David Chalmers in 2012 in his quest to resurrect or at least strengthen some elements of philosophy's analytic enterprise, he cites again the contribution of Gettier as an exemplar of what he calls a priori scrutability. And for many of you who have been following my lectures, in lecture 3, when we discussed the construction of the world, these are the issues that we discussed when we are looking at the Laplacian scrutability theory. So again, as you can see, David Chalmers 2012 takes us into this direction when he cites Gettier's contribution as an exemplar of what he calls a priori scrutability. So again, I want you to bring that knowledge. I want you to bring that knowledge that you picked from the Laplacian scrutability theory, which we did discuss when we were dealing with the construction of the world. Now, of course, as you can see in this case, the philosopher's verdict seems to indicate that Gettier 1, an apparently traditional definition of knowledge which had been lost, and epistemology is thereby wiser in this case. Now, the real conceptual progress has been made. It is widely assumed by many philosophers that we are moving and we are getting somewhere. Now, of course, there are so many questions that you can ask here. Just how much wiser is epistemology, courtesy of Gettier's supposed results, right? Can we say that after receiving the results of Gettier, we can actually say that epistemology now is wiser? Maybe yes, maybe not. The judgment is yours as you go through the various journal articles and books and publications that have been produced over time. Remember, there are so many arguments, many ideas which are presented there. And of course, we need to really think about this. And in this case, I really think there is an alternative way for an epistemology of knowledge to accommodate what we may call Gettier's challenge. And whereas some people may actually think that Gettier 1 and dismissed the traditional thinking and definition of knowledge, I can only say that probably there's room in that very definition to accommodate the Gettier's arguments and ideas. So let me just introduce the ideas and the cases. Now, as you can see, the epistemological orthodoxy against which this lecture is delivered is referred to as Gettiology. Remember, we are dealing with the Gettier problem, the Gettier challenge. Gettier, Edmund Gettier, challenging the traditional definition of knowledge. So, in the subsequent statements, I will not be talking about the Gettier challenge, but I'll be talking about Gettiology, because Gettier introduces a concept that certainly is associated with his name. Now, although the term Gettiology designates Gettier-inspired study, a particular range of epistemological content, it does not capture the unquestioning acceptance by epistemologists of the core of that content, specifically the main premise guiding Gettier's study, ladies and gentlemen. And that acceptance, which is the epistemological embrace of Gettier's putative result, an embrace routinely claimed to be epistemically secure and perhaps even theoretically explicable, is receiving critical attention today, and we need to revisit and, if possible, see how that can be accommodated in the Gettier's, sorry, not in the Gettier's, but in the traditional definition of knowledge. So Gettierism springs forth from, but is far from exhausted in content by this central tenet, which says Gettier was right. Now, many questions can be asked about what was he right? Right. Can we say that Gettier was right? Okay, if we say that Gettier was right, what was he right about? And of course, as you will be seeing from the ensuing discussion, we'll discover the following, right? That, you know, he revealed the first of a definition and a somewhat generic justified true belief definition of knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. So Gettier's immediate conclusion was that a sufficient condition for a belief being knowledge had not been adequately delineated by the epistemologically favored form of definition, for a belief could be true and well justified being knowledge. How did Gettier claim to establish this shortcoming in that form of definition? Now, astute counter-exampling was his method. And he described two possible situations that functioned as decisive counter-examples to the justified true belief definition of knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. So phrases along the lines of Gettier showed that, or Gettier proved that, are now the rigor for epistemology graduate students to learn in this setting. For most, it is apparently an effortless, gained skill, an easy epistemological lesson. And what has been an orthodoxy for quite a while, that is the Gettierism, is becoming only more so. And it has long since moved beyond talking just of a form of definition of knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. And these days, many epistemologists would report Gettier's result also in these broader terms. Gettier showed that if we are to understand the nature of knowledge epistemologically, then we need to conceive of it in terms other than simply of justification, other than of simply truth, and other than of simply belief. So Gettierism thus becomes a meta-epistemological thesis too. It is the thesis that Gettier was right, and hence that a constraint upon our conceiving accurately of knowledge is that our conception will incorporate his contribution, ladies and gentlemen. And naturally, we may choose to say much more than that about knowledge's nature. And of course, at the end of the day, no need we engage in detail with Gettier's challenge, and yet we are at least required not to reject what Gettier showed. Now, this is a minimal implication of Gettierism. Now, a less minimal implication is Gettierism's being regarded as apt motivation for moving epistemology beyond conceiving of knowledge merely as a justified true belief. As students, as PhD students, you need to engage in discussions. You need to engage in discourses that challenge the traditional being because of our quest to try and understand the world, as Gettier did, not Gettier, as actually Laplace scrutability theory indicates, if you go back to our lecture of the scrutability theory, that certainly, and when he talks about the Laplacian demon, right, that the world is so complex, reality is so complex, dynamic, that an attempt to model that reality can also be challenging in this case. So that's why we need to be engaged in discussions and discourses which will enable us to understand the world better. And therefore, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you the cases, Gettier cases, that really form the bedrock of our discussions when he attempts to challenge our traditional definition of knowledge as justified true belief. I want to say it is more than 50 years since Gettier startled epistemologists with his two counterexamples. In fact, it is now widely believed that there were a few earlier intimations of the possibility of such tales being used to match the same conceptual effort as Gettier used them. And a very good example is Alexius Menas and Bertrand Russell. I hope you remember the Russell's philosophy of science. These are usually mentioned as maybe having indicated that this definition of knowledge is not really very concrete and not very strong, not to be challenged at any given time. And of course, as you can see, perhaps similar cases were also discussed in earlier Indian and Tibetan epistemology. And even so, in 1963, was when the idea behind such cases made its impact within Western epistemology and courtesy of Gettier. By now we have long had his presumed lesson in our epistemological minds. And those two stories of his are a familiar fare, old friends, and soothingly instructive, and of course very incisive. And these stories and kindred others have become known as Gettier cases. I will not attempt a full account of what makes a situation a Gettier case, even though it is epistemologically usual to talk in a general way of Gettier cases as such. And this category is treated as encompassing Gettier's own two stories, plus the sundry sufficiently similar ones that have been called Gettier cases. Now, when epistemologists have been claiming to explain or illustrate the thesis, then they certainly roll back to these cases, the Gettier cases as you know them. So I'll give you the first case, ladies and gentlemen, and the first case is actually taken from what we call the Job Coins case. So here, for specificity is Gettier's case in produced in 1963, often called Job Coins case. And this is the case that brings in Smith and brings in Jones as well. So Gettier advances his case this way, that Smith had good evidence that Jones is about to be offered a particular job with a particular company. Now, Smith also gains evidence for Jones having 10 coins in his pocket. Now, thereupon, Smith infers with good justification that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. So this was an inference that was made. But actually, it is Smith and not Jones who will get the job, right? And this will be a complete surprise to Smith. He is equally ignorant of there being 10 coins in his own pocket, yet there are. So Smith also has 10 coins in his pocket, but is not really aware that he has 10 coins. So accordingly, even though Smith has managed to gain a well-justified true belief, right? And the one we are calling here justified true belief is that proposition that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. That is proposition, right? So the question that was raised by Gettier at this stage is this belief of his knowledge? And the answer is clearly not, said Gettier. And his view has since been shared by epistemologists in general. Smith does not know. So the same is true, mutatis mutandis, of other epistemologically popular Gettier cases. And you can actually pick Roderick Chisholm's ship in the field case, which is presented here in a slightly embellished version and applied to you as the epistemic agent. So the case now goes, the ship in the field case, right, goes as follows. From outside a field, you see within it what looks just like a ship. Remember, you are very far. You see something that resembles a ship out there. You infer that there is a ship in the field, and that's your propositional knowledge. And you are right, because hidden behind that hill, there is one ship. Yet what you are seeing is not a ship. It only looks and resembles like a ship, and acts like a ship, and walks like a ship. But in the actual sense, what you are seeing is not a ship. It is a dog disguised as a ship. So Gettier poses another question. Is your belief, right, that the proposition on knowledge now, is your belief that there is a ship in the field, therefore not knowledge, when there is a ship hiding behind something that resembles like a ship, which is a dog? And the answer is indeed so, right? And that's the standard epistemological reaction which is always raised. So we can also use a third case in this case, right? But of course, it is also attributed to Gettier. You know, anything that challenges the traditional understanding and definition of knowledge is taken to be the Gettier case. So another interesting Gettier case is Keith Lachlan and Thomas Paxson, 1969, Tom Grabbit case. The Tom Grabbit case, right? Grabbit case. Now, this is how it goes. When inside the library, you see a man take a book from a shelf, secrete the book inside his coat, then walk directly out of the building, seemingly stealing the book. This man looks exactly like someone whom you know. And that person or someone you know is Grabbit, Tom Grabbit. Moreover, he's Tom Grabbit and is stealing that book. So you have a true belief supported by good visual evidence that Tom has stolen a book from the library. Yet, Tom's mother proceeds to tell people, of course, without your being aware of her doing so, that Tom was now here near the library at that time. She claims that his identical twin, John, was in the library. The question now is your belief that Tom Grabbit has stolen a book from the library therefore not knowledge? Again, the standard epistemological reaction has been that in such a circumstance, the belief in question is not knowledge. So finally, I can give you another case, which is actually the Carl Guinness famous case, which was first published by Alvin Goldman, 1976, of the fake bands. So Henry is driving in the countryside with his small son, and he says, "Look, there is a ban," says Henry. Even the helpful aunt and revening father. Does Henry know that he's seeing a ban? In answering this, bear in mind that in fact, without his realizing it, Henry is looking at the only real ban present in the country at that time. Everything else in that country that would look like a ban to everyone driving past it is actually a fake ban, a papier or mache ban facade. So Henry would have been deceived had he been looking at one of these. As it happens, he's not deceived because he's seeing the one genuine ban. But does his belief, I am seeing a ban, fail to be knowledge anyway? Most epistemologists still reply yes to that question. Yes, Henry does not know. Now again, with these and other cases in hand, ladies and gentlemen, let us attempt an initial and schematic taxonomic characterization of Gettier cases in general, and that's where I'll end. Now, of course, we may say, be it actual or possible, and be it realistic or not, any Gettier case is a situation where the following generic description is instantiated, right? Usually in quirky detail. An epistemic agent forms a belief that is true and well, even if not perfectly justified. Yet there is some kind of marked oddity in the surrounding circumstances, an oddity in how that justified true belief exists. An oddity bearing in a puzzling way upon whether the justified true belief is knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. And in this case, a helpful piece of further terminology ensues, and that's a belief is Gettiered if and only if it is the belief at the heart of a Gettier case. And a cautionary point is already up here. Epistemologists often, even when simply introducing the idea of a Gettier case, prejudge pending interpretive details by saying from the very outset what form that auditor takes within the case. And of course, Tim Black, for example, begins his survey article by saying that Gettier's counterexamples involve epistemic agents whose beliefs are true simply as a matter of luck. It is certainly tempting to point already to the presence and influence of such a feature within Gettier cases, within specific ones, even within Gettier cases in general. Nonetheless, we must resist the temptation for now. Can we strengthen this description without conceding yet to be argued or explained or shown, namely, that the belief within a Gettier case is not knowledge? We could do so if we wish, ladies and gentlemen, by replacing the phrase in question with one like this. Would say an audit that has seemed to most epistemologists since 1963 to prevent the justified true beliefs being knowledge. In other words, this very observation by Gettier, which some people think that, it challenges and dismisses the traditional thinking and the traditional definition of knowledge, you could simply accommodate that observation by simply saying knowledge is justified true belief, but adding something, and the addition could be an oddity, right? That's from odd. An oddity that has seemed to most epistemologists since 1963 to prevent the justified true beliefs being knowledge. Otherwise, let us resist for now any further precisification of this element of the concept of the Gettier case. It might also be very helpful to mention a way of distinguishing two kinds of Gettier cases, assuming with the most epistemologists that the fake Barnes case is a Gettier case. Thus, each Gettier case is either helpful or dangerous. So we introduce the issue of helpfulness and dangerous concept here. In terms of helpful, we simply say, we simply include Gettier's own tool and the sheep in the field case. The fake Barnes case is a dangerous one, as is the Tom Grabbit case. Now, the difference between these two categories of Gettier cases may be briefly conveyed as follows, as I've already told you: helpful Gettier cases, and of course dangerous. Now, of course, if we are dealing with helpful Gettier cases, we discover that in each such case, the justified true belief is attained partly because of the case's odd circumstance. And the oddity helps to bring about the combination of truth, belief, and justification. Of course, without quite that oddness, maybe that justified true belief would not have emerged. And so the person would not have been even that close, right? However close it is to having knowledge that P, and that's propositional knowledge, right? Having knowledge that P, by having this combination of justification, that is truth, and belief that P, that proposition. Now, I said that the other ones could take the form of dangerous Gettier cases, and each of these cases likewise includes an odd circumstance as well. In this sort of case, however, the odd circumstances remain only a threat to the existence of the justified true belief, which combination this time comes about without the odd circumstances help. If that circumstance was not present, ladies and gentlemen, the belief would be justified and true in the way it is, but with all else being normal, not odd. As it is, the belief remains close due to that odd circumstance to not being both true and justified in the way that in fact it is. I should, at this material time, ladies and gentlemen, note that some epistemological components of these observations are still open and up for discussion, or what we call discourse. And you should also note that some epistemologists, even while maintaining a commitment to Gettierism, do not agree that Henry in the fake Barnes case lacks knowledge. In fact, they believe that there is an element of knowledge in it. Hence, they do not regard this as a Gettier case. And correlatively, they might set aside as not really directing us to Gettier cases this category of case that I have described a few seconds ago. I've mentioned the fake bands case, though because most epistemologists continue regarding it as a Gettier case from which knowledge is absent. For simplicity, however, when applying a general argument to a particular Gettier case, I will usually focus upon one of the other cases. And that is if we have more discussions and more presentations and more lectures, ladies and gentlemen. Those from the first category that I've mentioned will be taken as helpful cases. Of course, I've shown you the helpful cases and the dangerous cases. In the interest of time and knowing exactly what is before us in this case, allow me to conclude my discussion on knowledge, which is actually seen in terms of justified true beliefs. But before I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you a challenge for you to start really thinking about these aspects so that in future, if we ever, by chance or probably in any way, if ever we have to meet again and discuss and have a discourse over this, you should have reflected on this challenge. So the challenge I'm putting to you, ladies and gentlemen, especially those who are interested in the continued search for knowledge is, right, I'm just saying, justified true belief is the classic foundation of knowledge. We are also aware that Gettier challenged this criterion in the early 1960s using the Smith and Jones Job Coins case, using the Roderick Ship in the Field case, and using Carl Ginnett famous case. I want you to start thinking about these cases, and I want you to generate a discussion, right? And I want you to discuss the view that while his main argument, and I mean here Gettier, while Gettier's main argument is precise, the substance of his conclusion is vacuous. I want you to generate a discussion on that, and I want you to tell us in our subsequent lectures what you have discovered. So again, thank you very much for attending this lecture, a very short one on knowledge and the Gettier problem. And in this lecture, we have discussed the year of Gettier, Gettierism introduced, and Gettier cases introduced. And what remains now is for you to go and read the books that I've given you, including Lowe, 1978, Gettier's Notion of Justification, and of course, Kornblith, Knowledge and Its Place in Nature. And that book is published by Oxford Clarendon Press. And then also read others and journal articles like Licker 2006 on the Gettier problem, or the Gettier problem. And you'll find that on page 148, 168 in Epistemology Futures, of course, edited by S. Hetherington, Oxford. I want to thank you very much for attending this lecture. And I wish you the best of time. And we have concluded our lectures in the philosophy of science, economics. I wish you a nice time. Bye.